Thank you for taking the time to talk to me about your film.
Of course. Thanks
You
for
know,
having me.
of course. Yeah, the title, right off the bat was very intriguing. It's cliche, but at the same time, it's like one of those things that, it gets you thinking. So, first off, how does the title relate to the film and the central narrative and underlying message throughout the film?
Well, the title's like twofold, right? Like the first, there's the words "be careful" are not in there, but they're
Yeah.
implied, and so that's so the idiom "be careful what you wish for because you just might get it" applies to the movie. And also, at the end of the film, I mean, I guess it's spoiler territory to some degree, but at the end of the film, um, Ryan gets what he wanted,
Yeah.
and but is it worth it? I guess so. That's what, and so what you wish for. So it's sort of slightly ironic as well.
When did the title like come about? Where were you in the process when you decided on that?
At the end, after I'd written it.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Cool. That was one of my first questions. Once I finished the film, I was like, I wonder when that happened. So that's cool to hear. Um, can you provide like because obviously he's not the only thing in this film. What can the fans look forward to as far as like other arcs or other characters, because there's a lot at play here.
Yeah. I mean, I like the characters a lot in this movie. I had a really good time writing them because they're all really different, They're all got their own energy going on. And I feel like maybe, that's what would be part of enjoyable about this film is that it's a situation that's played out that's consistent. This location in Latin America, and it's, this incredible, vista and the whole thing with all these really different people operating together and sort of bouncing off each other. So yeah, I mean, we have Imogen, who's this British corporate British, I guess, host of this dinner that has been, is quite young, but despite her youth, is just like a total pro. Nothing rattles her, and what's interesting about her is that I think that as the film progresses, you start to, on some level, at least I do, I start to like sympathize with her too, her plight. Like particularly, there's a police presence that enters, and they are, you know, they're, they're the good guys on some level. But the way that the film plays out, you sort of, they're also like, the force of antagonism. You don't want them to find out. And so I think that with this movie, there's this push and pull between, antagonism and who you're rooting for. And then you also have other characters like Maurice, who's, I think, is a very amiable, lovely dude who just happens to be a sociopath. And yeah, and so I think that, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that maybe one of the strengths of the film is that we have all these different characters that are just playing around playing off each other.
Yeah, and I like what you said too, because as the movie goes on, you're not really sure who you should root for, and you find a little bit of yourself in each character, which I thought was really unique and a lot of fun for the viewer.
Yeah, I think it has to do with empathy. I think like with Imogen's a good example. I mean, she's somebody that when you first meet her, you're not really, you're not on her side at all. She's antagonistic to Nick. But as the film progresses and you understand her position and who she is and what she has to do, and then the obstacles that are in her way, and then so then you understand her role and how to deal with those obstacles, even if their obstacles are sort of good, she's having to deal with them, and so you're with her too. I've often thought that about this idea about likability in movies. And people talk about, oh, is this person likable or whatever, and I actually don't believe that. I believe you have to understand them, and if you understand a character, then they can be completely horrendous. But as long as you understand their motivations, I think you go along with them.
Agreed. I'm really curious about your process. How did you sit down to tell this tale, and not only as a writer but as a director? Like where is your mind at, as far as once you get on set, how do you kind of move it from like the paper to the production?
We you know, I think that in this case, I was looking at where we were shooting, the crew I was shooting with, the amount of days we had to shoot it, the amount of money we had, and all of that sort of equated to, well, what's the best way? And also, what is the story, the tone of the story, and the message of the story? What's the best way to communicate it? And so we chose to shoot in a fairly precise manner, and sort of stripped down. I wanted to strip. I was actually looking at Down by Law by Jim Jarmusch, just in terms of the visual aspect of it, how stripped down that is, and I really enjoyed that feeling. And I thought that because of the money and the budget and the amount of time we had to shoot it, I thought that type of aesthetic was something that we could sort of mirror. I don't think it looks like Down by Law, but like that. But just looking at the way he shot that, that was certainly in my mind. And yeah, and I also wanted, I mean, ultimately what I was trying to do is I was, because the character of Ryan comes into this world and he wants it, he's coveting it, he wants it, he feels like it's something, he's running away from something, and he's looking at this incredible house and this job that his friend Jack has, and he's like, why can't I have this kind of thing? I wanted to present that visually to an audience too. So when we come into the movie and we see it, I wanted the way the film looks and the way that the soundtrack is and everything to be very pleasant and seductive. So we think as an audience member, oh yes, I want to be in this world. I want to enter this. I enjoy being in this space. So we also desire it. And then obviously that turns, and that's the enjoyment maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, we've talked about the setting, kind of the ambience, the characters. How did you go about selecting the cast? These players, how did they get put in these roles?
Well, we had we offered the film to Nick Stahl, just because I knew of Nick and I thought he'd be a great noir hero, and I think that he's uniquely suited for that type of role. But all the other roles were through open casting.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wild, because a lot of times they seem so effortless at times. It just seemed like ultimately I was kind of like like a voyeur situation. So that's kind of interesting to hear that there wasn't anyone else selected for those roles prior to the open casting.
Yeah, it's just the process of I mean, like, casting is so fun though,
Yeah.
open casting too, because what happens is that you have the character in your mind, or at least in the way I think about it is, I'm not looking for a particular visual type necessarily, but it's more like the essence, the personality of the character, and then all these different actors come in and they give you their version of it, so it's so interesting. And then often, what I mean, at least in this case, what happens is that there's an intuitive response where you're just like, there they are. They kind of reveal themselves. I know, for example, with Maurice, we were casting out of Colombia where we shot the film, and we were having no success. I mean, there were very good actors who were, sending in tapes and stuff. But it just wasn't working. Maurice hadn't arrived yet, he just wasn't there. And then the first AD said, oh, I know of a guy, and he wasn't on our casting director's radar. And he sent in a tape, like, randomly. And it was literally that thing of he did 2 scenes. And I was like, oh my God, there he is. So,
That's awesome.
that part of it's kind of fun,
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, uh, you mentioned kind of like how you came up with the look of the film, but I'm also interested about like maybe inspirations as far as like the story goes or the characters. Do you typically take from like your own personal experiences, or is it like, other films or stories that you've read, and with this film in particular?
I think it's a combination of both. I always liked this kind of story, this sort of tale unfolding, and I guess, but in terms of influence, I think probably the biggest influence was, I had been reading only maybe 6 months previous a book of Roald Dahl short stories, but for adults, and I felt like this had a kind of similarity to that, and just the way that he spins a tale.
Yeah,
Also, I'm a big fan of The Talented Mr. Ripley. I'm also a big fan of Rope by Alfred Hitchcock. Um,
perfect.
and The Treasure of Sierra Madre. And, there are a whole bunch of things that I really like. But it's funny, I think. I mean, at least for me, what happens is I have all these things in my taste is my taste. But then you sort of sit down and you kind of go on this journey of writing. And at least for me, I'm not thinking about like other stuff. I'm just doing it, But obviously, I'm pulling in from my influences, but I'm not consciously trying to.
Were any of the characters, represented anyone in your personal life?
Oh no, thank God.
Yeah, perfect reaction. I love that. I definitely felt the Hitchcock influence right off the bat. The ambiance is there, and I like the way that it unraveled as well. I caught this film through Fright Fest, and I thought it was a standout for me. It was one of my favorites. Obviously it's going to be showing at Fantastic Fest as well. You know, how do these festivals kind of play into getting the word out? And overall, what's your opinion of kind of you know audiences and these types of things, seeing the film?
I think that with indie films right now, it's really difficult to get a theatrical. Obviously, most things are going to streaming. And so in a way, sometimes films like our film, the festivals are the only shot it's going to get at playing a theatrical. And the reason that I'm interested, I mean, look, the reason I make movies and I'm interested in making movies is because I enjoy the experience of being in the movies with other people and seeing something and getting into that whole world and whatever. And so, festivals give us that, and it's a way for people to experience new work and usually there's no marketing around it, and there's very little marketing and PR. It's just, here's a new film, and there's an element of not of knowing only a little bit about a movie that also makes it kind of exciting. There's a discovery aspect to it. And yeah, I think film festivals are vital right now, particularly for indie movies, because it is like I was saying, maybe the only shot you're going to get playing, with an audience. And that's one of the greatest joys is, particularly as a filmmaker, is to be in an audience, be in a cinema with an audience, watching something and feeling, that their enjoyment, in the room.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things as well. I like how you mentioned discovery. I went into this film blind, and because of which I was a little bit more blown away than anticipated. It was a standout for me, as I mentioned, and I look forward to hearing what other audiences say about it too, because I want to see if they experience it the same way that I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably with this film too, because it's told subjectively, because we're experiencing it with the character, and because he's sort of biting off more than he can chew, so to speak.
Yeah,
And he doesn't really know what he's into. He's getting into, and it just keeps escalating. That there's an element of gleeful, sort of wickedness about this going on, and I think, I mean, my hope is that as stressed out as Ryan is, the more stressed out he is, the more enjoyable it is for us, because we're experiencing it with him, but we're also not, right? We're sitting in our seats, and so I think it's, yeah, maybe it's that subjective storytelling that makes it feel more unexpected as well.
agreed. Well, that's all the time we have, and I appreciate the time. Here at CineDump, we let the doers know how they're doing, and Nicholas, you're doing just fine.
Thank you,
I
Jesse.
can't wait to see what the audiences think, and I'll be looking forward to your name next to some more projects in the future as well.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Good talking to you.